The moment Karen pointed at my neck pillow, I knew trouble was coming. We were barely 10 minutes into boarding when she stomped down the aisle like she owned the plane. "You need to hand that over," she snapped, jabbing her finger toward my pillow. At first I thought she was joking. Who demands a stranger's neck pillow? But her glare said she was deadly serious. Passengers around us turned their heads, curious to see the drama unfold. I laughed nervously and told her I had bought it myself. That's when she exploded. "I have a medical condition. I deserve it more than you," she yelled loud enough for half the cabin to hear. The flight attendants rushed over, trying to calm her down, but she wouldn't stop shouting. She even tried to grab it from around my neck. My heart pounded, not from fear, but disbelief. People whispered, phones came out, and I realized this woman was about to ruin her own trip. What started as a small act of entitlement turned into a full-blown airline meltdown that no one would forget. By the time we landed, Karen wasn't just embarrassed, she was banned. And all because of one pink-necked pillow. You think you've met a Karen? Wait till you hear how this one went from demanding comfort to being escorted off the plane in front of everyone. Sun shining through the windows, her rage echoing down the aisle. The airport was alive with the hum of morning energy. Sunlight poured through the tall glass panels of the terminal, scattering golden reflections across polished floors. Travelers bustled everywhere, families dragging luggage, business people glued to their phones, couples whispering goodbyes. I had arrived early, as I always did, preferring calm over the chaos of last-minute boarding. After checking in and passing through security, I treated myself to a coffee and a muffin, watching airplanes roll across the bright tarmac. It was one of those rare, peaceful mornings that made traveling feel exciting rather than exhausting. My flight was bound for San Diego, a short trip for work and a little bit of sunshine. I liked flying during the day. There was something comforting about seeing the clouds below instead of endless darkness. The announcement came through the speakers, cheerful and precise. Flight 274 to San Diego is now boarding. I gathered my things, slung my backpack over my shoulder, and headed toward the gate, feeling relaxed and ready. As I entered the plane, I was greeted by the familiar scent of clean air mixed with coffee from the galley. The flight attendants smiled and guided passengers to their seats. I found mine 1-2A by the window. I always picked a window seat. It gave me space to rest my head and enjoy the view. The sunlight streamed in warmly as I sat down and placed my pink memory foam neck pillow around my neck. It was my favorite travel companion, soft and slightly oversized, perfect for long flights. I took out my headphones, queued up a relaxing playlist, and leaned back with a satisfied sigh. People slowly filled the cabin, chatting, laughing, finding spots for their bags. There was the usual shuffle of boarding, a mix of polite smiles and mild impatience. I scrolled through my phone, half listening to the announcements and safety instructions. Everything felt ordinary, peaceful, predictable, until she appeared. I noticed her even before she reached my row. A woman in her mid-40s, tall and sharp-featured, striding down the aisle with an air of impatience. Her designer sunglasses sat perched on her head like a crown. She wore a crisp white blouse, tight jeans, and heels that clicked against the plane floor with authority. Her purse swung on her arm like it was a weapon. The expression on her face was pure irritation, as if the entire flight were personally inconveniencing her. She stopped near my row, scanned her ticket, then frowned deeply. I could feel her eyes on me even before she spoke. "Excuse me," she said, her tone sharp and demanding. "You're in my seat." I looked up, startled. "Oh, I don't think so," I said politely, glancing at my ticket. "Dozy, She tilted her head with a smirk. "Mine says 1-2-2. For a brief moment, I doubted myself. Maybe I had made a mistake. But then I looked at the row number on the overhead bin. It clearly read 12. My seat was by the window, as assigned. The woman's ticket, I realized, probably said 12C or 1-B, and she was just reading it wrong. "Actually," I said calmly, "this is 1-8 window. You might be in the aisle seat." Her eyes narrowed. "I know how to read," she snapped. Then, with a dramatic sigh, she added, "Fine, whatever. But that pillow, where did you get it?" I blinked, confused. I brought it from home." She crossed her arms. "You need to hand that over. I have a medical condition that requires neck support, and I forgot mine. You look fine, you don't need it." At first I thought she was joking. A small laugh escaped me before I could stop it. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but it's mine." Her face twisted into offense. "You're sorry, that's it. I'm telling you, I need it more than you." A couple of passengers turned their heads. The aisle was crowded with people still trying to find their seats, and the commotion began to draw attention. I kept my voice level. "I understand, but I can't give you something I bought. Maybe ask the flight attendant, they might have a spare." She huffed loudly. "Unbelievable. People today are so selfish." She muttered it just loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. I tried to ignore her and looked out the window. The sunlight glinted off the wing, and the runway stretched endlessly in the distance. I told myself to stay calm. I wasn't going to argue with a stranger over a neck pillow then. Without warning, she reached out her hand, fastened, actually tugged on the pillow around my neck. I exclaimed, pulling away. My heart jumped. The people in the row behind us gasped. "Ma'am," I said. "Firmer now." You can't just grab people's things. Her voice rose dramatically. Don't you raise your voice at me. I'm just asking for a little compassion. My doctor says I need neck support. The flight attendant, a young woman with a calm but serious face, came over immediately. Is everything okay here? She asked. Before I could answer, Karen spoke up first. This man is refusing to help a passenger in medical distress. The attendant blinked, clearly unsure how to respond to that. Ma'am, she said slowly, that's his personal item. We can't ask him to give it to you, but we do have small cushions if you'd like one. Karen scoffed. Small cushions? I can't believe the lack of empathy on this plane. She folded her arms tightly, glaring out the aisle. The flight attendant nodded politely, offered her a pillow from the overhead bin, and left. Karen took it but made sure to mutter something under her breath, something about entitled young people. I pretended not to hear, though my patience was wearing thin. The sunlight poured in warm and bright through the window, casting light across her scowling face. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and focused on the music in my ears. When boarding finally finished, the captain made his welcome announcement. The engines hummed to life. I thought that maybe, just maybe, the worst was over. But Karen wasn't done. She leaned slightly toward me and whispered, you know, you could have just done the right thing. People like you ruin travel for others. I opened my eyes, met her glare, and said quietly, people like me just mind their own business. That shut her up for a moment. She turned away, muttering under her breath, but I didn't care. I had no intention of letting her ruin my flight. As the plane began to taxi, the morning sun flooded the cabin. The clouds outside looked soft and endless. I tried to let the peaceful view wash over me, but a strange feeling settled in my chest, an uneasy awareness that this wasn't over. Because when a person like Karen doesn't get her way, they don't stop, they wait, they plot, and something told me that before this flight was over, my simple pink neck pillow would become the center of a storm I never asked for. The engines roared. The plane lifted into the brilliant daylight sky, and somewhere beside me, Karen's glare burned as hot as the sun itself. The plane leveled off above the clouds, sunlight flooding the cabin in a soft golden hue. The hum of the engines mixed with the gentle clinking of drink carts and the muffled chatter of passengers settling in for the flight. Everything should have been peaceful. I had my window view, my headphones, and my neck pillow, my small sanctuary in the sky. But one seat away, the storm named Karen was brewing again. For the first half hour, she was unusually quiet. She flipped through a glossy magazine, sighed dramatically every few minutes, and kept shooting annoyed glances in my direction. Every time I caught her looking, she turned away with a huff. I tried to ignore her, but her restless energy filled the space like static. I knew she was stewing about something. The flight attendant came down the aisle with the beverage cart, her smile unwavering despite the narrow space and impatient passengers. Would you like something to drink? She asked cheerfully. Coffee, please, I said, returning her smile. Karen interrupted before the attendant could even turn toward her. I need herbal tea, she said in a commanding tone, and it better not be lukewarm this time. I'm allergic to cold liquids. The attendant blinked but kept her professionalism. Of course, ma'am. I'll make sure it's hot. Karen sniffed as if she'd just done the woman a favor by demanding perfection. When the attendant left, she leaned back, muttering to herself about standards and how service used to mean something. I sipped my coffee and gazed out the window, determined to tune her out. But that small peace didn't last long. Out of nowhere, Karen spoke again, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. You know, she said, turning her head toward me, some people are just so inconsiderate. They see someone in discomfort and still refuse to help. I knew exactly who she meant, but I stayed silent. Responding would only fuel her drama. She wasn't satisfied with silence. I'm talking to you, she pressed, her voice sharp. You think keeping that pillow makes you right. It just makes you selfish. I exhaled slowly, pulled one earbud out, and turned to her. Ma'am, I told you before it's my personal item. You can't demand other people's belongings. She crossed her arms. I wasn't demanding. I was requesting. There's a difference. You tried to grab it off my neck, I said evenly. Her mouth dropped open in mock shock. Oh, so now you're accusing me of assault. A man 2 rows ahead peeked over his seat. The woman sitting across the aisle quietly lifted her phone, pretending to check messages, but I could tell she was recording. The tension was visible, thick and awkward. Ma'am, I said calmly, I just want to enjoy my flight. Please, let's not argue. She let out a laugh that sounded more like a snarl. You're unbelievable. I'm sitting next to the rudest man alive. The flight attendant returned with her tea, and the moment she approached, Karen's tone flipped completely. Oh, thank you, sweetie, she cooed, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. You're doing a wonderful job. Unlike some people, she shot me a sideways glare. The attendant nodded politely and moved on. I tried to lose myself in my playlist again, but Karen wasn't finished. A few minutes later, she started coughing loudly, exaggerated theatrical coughs that made people turn their heads. She pressed the call button repeatedly until another attendant hurried over. Yes, ma'am. Karen clutched her throat dramatically. This air is awful. I can't breathe properly. My neck is stiff again, and I need to rest it. This man refuses to share his pillow. It's against the passenger code of conduct to deny aid to someone in distress. I froze, stunned. Was she serious? The attendant looked at both of us, clearly uncomfortable. Ma'am, she said carefully, we can't force anyone to give up personal property. If you need additional support, we can bring extra blankets or cushions. That's not the same, Karen snapped. I can't believe this. I've been flying for 20 years and never met such unkindness. The murmurs began. A few passengers whispered. A man across the aisle leaned toward me and whispered, "Just ignore her, dude. She's looking for attention." I nodded faintly, though my jaw was tight. Karen's face had turned slightly red, not from embarrassment, but from the sheer energy of her outrage. When she finally stopped arguing, the flight attendant walked away, apologizing under her breath. Karen sat back, sipping her tea loudly, eyes fixed on the window. I thought maybe she'd quiet down now. Then, halfway through the flight, she struck again. I had just started dozing off when I felt movement beside me. My head lifted, and to my disbelief, Karen's hand was again reaching toward my neck pillow. "What are you doing?" I asked sharply, sitting up straight. She jerked her hand back, feigning innocence. "Oh, I was just adjusting my seatbelt. Don't flatter yourself." I stared at her. "You were touching my pillow." "Stop accusing me," she hissed, voice rising again. "You're harassing me." That word harassing made a few passengers' heads snap around. She was playing the victim now, twisting everything. I kept my composure. "Ma'am, please stop creating a scene." She smirked. "Oh, I'm creating a scene." "No, sir, you are. By refusing a simple act of kindness, people like you make the world colder." Before I could respond, the head flight attendant, a calm older man, came over. "Is everything all right here?" Karen immediately pointed at me. "This passenger has been aggressive and rude since takeoff. He keeps accusing me and making me uncomfortable." My mouth dropped open. "That's not true." She tried to grab my pillow twice. The attendant's eyes moved between us, assessing the situation. "All right," he said firmly. "Let's all take a deep breath. Ma'am, please refrain from touching other passengers or their belongings." "Sir, let's keep things calm." Karen gasped dramatically. "So you're taking his side?" "I'm not taking sides, ma'am. I'm asking for cooperation." Her voice turned cold. "I will be reporting this to your airline, to corporate. Everyone will hear about this." The attendant gave a polite nod and walked away, clearly used to this kind of behavior. I leaned back in my seat, pulse still racing. The tension lingered like heavy air. I turned up the volume on my headphones, desperate for some calm, but my mind kept replaying what just happened. Karen had twisted the story completely, and the staff had no choice but to play neutral. Outside, sunlight shimmered off the endless clouds, turning them white and gold. The peaceful scene felt like a cruel contrast to the chaos beside me. Karen eventually leaned back, pulled her blanket over her shoulders, and muttered, "Some people have no manners." I stared out the window, watching the world drift by beneath us. Every bump of turbulence made her gasp and clutch the armrest dramatically. I realized then that it wasn't just about the pillow. For her, it was about control, making sure the world bent around her needs. She couldn't stand the idea that someone had told her no. And as I sat there, the bright sun pouring in, I knew one thing for certain. Karen wasn't finished yet. The real explosion was still coming, and when it did, the whole plane would know her name. The plane glided steadily through the bright morning sky. But inside cabin 12, the tension was sharp enough to slice through the air. Most passengers had settled into the rhythm of the flight, treating, napping, or quietly chatting. The sunlight streamed through the windows in golden patches, reflecting off the silver trays and the soft blue seats. But the peaceful hum of the engines couldn't drown out the quiet storm brewing beside me. Karen had been muttering under her breath for the past 20 minutes. Her eyes darted toward me every few seconds, lips moving in silent complaints. I pretended not to notice, focusing instead on the clouds below. It was pointless to engage. I'd learned that much already, but she wasn't the kind of person to let a grudge go. Suddenly she pressed the call button again. The ding echoed across the cabin, drawing annoyed looks from nearby passengers. A flight attendant hurried over, trying to keep her tone polite. "Yes, ma'am. How can I help you?" Karen folded her arms dramatically. "I want to file a formal complaint against this passenger," she announced, pointing directly at me. Her voice was loud enough for the next 3 rows to hear. Heads turned instantly. The attendant blinked, clearly caught off guard. "A complaint?" "Yes," Karen said firmly. "He's been rude, aggressive, and refuses to cooperate with basic courtesy. He's making my flight unbearable." The attendant turned to me. "Sir, is that true?" "No," I said calmly, trying to keep my voice steady. "She's been harassing me since before takeoff. She tried to take my pillow, and now she's making up stories." Karen gasped like I'd just insulted her family. "Harassing you? You raised your voice at me." Everyone heard it. A few passengers murmured. The woman across the aisle who had been quietly recording earlier lifted her phone again, pretending to text but clearly capturing the moment. "Ma'am, please lower your voice," the attendant said softly, glancing around the cabin. "We can discuss this quietly." "I will not lower my voice," Karen snapped. "I have been humiliated on this flight, and no one is doing anything about it." Her voice echoed through the cabin, breaking the calm like glass. The man in front of us turned around and muttered, "Oh, not again." The flight attendant's expression tightened. "Ma'am, I understand you're upset, but you're disturbing other passengers." "Good," she shouted. "Maybe they'll understand what kind of disrespect I've endured." At this point, another flight attendant, older woman with calm authority, stepped forward. "Ma'am, that's enough," she said gently but firmly. "If you continue to raise your voice, we'll have to issue a warning." Karen stared at her, shocked. "A warning? For standing up for myself?" The older attendant nodded slowly. "For disturbing the cabin and making physical contact with another passenger earlier. We take that very seriously." The color drained from Karen's face, then quickly returned as a flush of anger. "You're lying. He's lying. This whole airline is ridiculous." The passengers were fully watching now. Some whispered to each other, others simply stared. The quiet hum of the plane had turned into a low buzz of tension. "Ma'am," the attendant continued, keeping her voice steady, "we'll need you to remain seated and calm for the rest of the flight. If you can't, we'll have to report this to the captain." Karen laughed bitterly. "Oh, you will be reporting this to your manager, because when I land, I'll make sure everyone knows how you treat paying customers." The attendants exchanged looks, the kind that said, "We've dealt with this before." They both walked away, whispering to each other quietly. Karen leaned back in her seat with a furious huff, muttering about lawsuits and social media justice. I stared straight ahead, doing everything in my power to stay silent. My pulse was quick, but I wasn't scared, just exhausted. Every word she said felt like fuel thrown onto a fire that didn't need to exist. The next few minutes passed in tense silence. The seatbelt light flickered off, and passengers began standing to stretch or visit the restroom. The sunlight shifted as the plane turned slightly, casting long warm stripes across the aisle. It could have been peaceful again if Karen had stayed quiet, but she didn't. When the drink cart returned, she waved down the same attendant who had scolded her. "Excuse me," she said loudly, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "I need to speak to the captain immediately." The attendant froze. "Ma'am, the captain can't leave the cockpit mid-flight." Karen rolled her eyes dramatically. "Of course he can't. Typical excuses." "Fine. Then I'll speak to whoever's in charge of this mess." "That would be me," the attendant said calmly. "Then fix it," Karen snapped. "Move this man to another seat. I refuse to sit beside someone who's been aggressive toward me." "I haven't said a single word to you in half an hour," I said, still keeping my tone calm. "You're the one shouting." Her head whipped toward me, eyes blazing. "You see that tone? That's aggression." The attendant exhaled slowly. "Ma'am, there are no empty seats available. Please remain seated and try to relax." Karen let out a frustrated groan, slamming her tray table shut. "Unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable." The flight attendant quietly walked away, shaking her head. A few minutes passed. Then I noticed Karen take out her phone. She started filming herself, holding it at an angle that captured her face and me in the background. "This is the kind of harassment passengers face," she said loudly into the camera. "I'm being discriminated against for having a medical condition, and this man refuses to help. The airline doesn't care." I turned slightly toward her. "You're filming me without consent," I said. She grinned smugly. "It's called evidence." That was the last straw for the attendants. One of them approached swiftly. "Ma'am, put the phone away now. You're not allowed to record other passengers without permission." Karen argued, of course, but eventually lowered her phone, glaring at everyone. "Fine, but I'm saving this video. You'll all regret this." By now, the entire cabin had witnessed enough. A man in a business suit muttered, "Someone needs to land this drama." The woman across the aisle whispered, "I can't wait to tell my friends about this flight." Then, the captain's calm voice came over the speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be beginning our descent into San Diego shortly. Please fasten your seatbelts." The attendants made one last pass through the aisle. When they reached our row, the lead attendant knelt beside Karen and said softly, "Ma'am, upon landing, we'll need you to stay seated until security boards the plane. Do you understand?" Karen's jaw dropped. "Security for me? You can't be serious." Her voice started to rise again, but the attendant's tone turned icy. "You've violated several passenger conduct policies, ma'am. Please don't make this worse." For the first time all flight, Karen went silent. Her face turned pale, eyes darting nervously. She sank back into her seat, arms crossed tightly. I looked out the window as the city came into view below sunlit buildings, cars moving like ants, the coastline stretching endlessly. The golden sky looked peaceful, almost mocking the chaos inside. The plane descended smoothly, the cabin filling with the soft thud of lowered landing gear. Karen sat stiff and silent now, her earlier arrogance replaced by a cold dread. Around us, passengers exchanged knowing looks that as we touched down I could almost feel the tension leave the air. But deep down, I knew this wasn't quite over yet. The moment those wheels hit the ground, Karen's story would take one final, unforgettable turn. The sunlight was dazzling as the plane began its descent, cutting through the clouds with a smooth hum. The passengers had buckled their seatbelts, tray tables were locked, and the cabin filled with that quiet tension that always comes just before landing. Outside, The coastline glimmered golden beaches and blue oceans sparkling like glass under the late morning sun. It should have been a calm and beautiful ending to the flight. But for everyone sitting near row 12, the real landing wasn't going to happen on the runway, it was going to happen in the aisle. Karen had gone completely silent for the last 20 minutes. Her face was pale and her lips tight, a stark contrast to the fiery red that had colored her cheeks for most of the flight. Her sunglasses had slipped down to the tip of her nose, and she clutched her designer purse in her lap as if it were a shield. The same woman who had shouted about rights and respect now looked cornered. I didn't say a word. I didn't even look her way. I could feel her tense energy like static, but I just kept my eyes on the view outside. The plane dipped lower, engines humming, as the skyline of San Diego came into full view. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. The intercom crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our final approach. Please remain seated until the seatbelt sign is turned off. Thank you for flying with us today." As we descended, the air grew thicker with anticipation. A few passengers nearby whispered quietly, their voices low. Everyone had seen and heard enough to know something was about to happen. When the wheels finally touched down with a soft thud, a collective sigh of relief filled the cabin. The pilot's calm voice came over the speaker again. "Welcome to San Diego. Local time is 11:42 a.m., and we'll be taxiing shortly to our gate." The passengers clapped lightly, as they often do after a smooth landing, but even their applause couldn't mask the awkward silence surrounding Karen. She sat rigid, staring straight ahead, pretending not to hear the murmurs around her. As the plane taxied toward the terminal, one of the flight attendants made her way down the aisle, speaking quietly into her walkie-talkie. Her tone was professional but firm, and she stopped just short of our row. Her eyes flicked toward me, then back to Karen. "Ma'am," she said softly, "when the seatbelt sign turns off, we'll need you to remain seated for a few moments. The captain has requested a brief conversation with airport security when we arrive at the gate." Karen blinked as if she hadn't heard her right. "Security," she repeated in disbelief. "Yes, ma'am," the attendant said evenly. "Just a standard report regarding an in-flight incident." Karen's jaw dropped. "You can't be serious. I was the victim here." A few passengers couldn't help but chuckle. The woman across the aisle, who had recorded parts of the earlier chaos, quietly raised an eyebrow. The attendant kept her composure. "Ma'am, please stay calm. No one is accusing you of anything yet, but we do need to file a report." Karen let out a high-pitched, disbelieving laugh. "This is outrageous. I'll have all of your jobs for this." I turned slightly toward the window again, hiding the faint smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. It wasn't satisfaction, it was relief. After hours of tension, someone was finally holding her accountable. The plane came to a full stop at the gate, the seatbelt sign chimed off, and immediately, the usual chaos began. People standing, stretching, reaching for overhead bags, the aisle filled with movement and chatter. But around us, a small circle of stillness remained. Karen tried to stand, but the flight attendant gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Please stay seated, ma'am," she reminded her. Karen yanked her arm away. "Don't touch me. I'm not some criminal." "No one said you were," the attendant replied calmly. "But we need you to remain here until security boards the aircraft." Her voice carried enough authority that even Karen hesitated. She huffed and sank back into her seat, muttering something about incompetent airlines. As passengers filed past us, several gave me sympathetic nods or amused smiles. One whispered "good luck, man," as he grabbed his suitcase from the overhead bin. I nodded back, still silent. After a few minutes, the doors at the front of the plane opened, and two uniformed security officers stepped on board. They spoke briefly with the head flight attendant before walking toward our row. Their demeanor was calm but unmistakably firm. "Ma'am," one of them said politely, "we need to ask you a few questions regarding an incident reported during this flight." Karen's expression twisted into shock and indignation. "What, you can't just barge in here and accuse me? I'm a loyal customer. I fly with this airline all the time." The officer kept his tone neutral. "No one's accusing you, ma'am. We're simply following protocol." "Protocol?" she barked. "Do you have any idea who I am?" The younger officer glanced at his notepad. "You're the passenger in seat 1C. That's all we need to know right now." A ripple of laughter spread softly through the nearby rows. Even the attendants had to fight back smiles. Karen stood abruptly, clutching her purse like a lifeline. "This is harassment. I was assaulted by this man." She pointed directly at me, her voice shaking with anger. The older officer turned toward me. "Sir, would you like to share your side of the story?" I nodded calmly. "Yes, of course. I've said nothing to her since takeoff except to ask her to stop touching my belongings. She tried to take my neck pillow multiple times and accused me of being rude when I refused. There are at least half a dozen passengers who saw it happen." The woman across the aisle raised her hand helpfully. "I did. I even have a video of her yelling and trying to grab it." Karen's face went pale. "You recorded me. That's illegal." "It's not illegal when you're screaming in public," the woman said matter-of-fact. The officers exchanged looks. The older one sighed quietly. "Ma'am, based on multiple witness statements and the video evidence, we'll need you to accompany us off the aircraft for a discussion." Karen's eyes widened in disbelief. You're escorting me off? I didn't do anything wrong. Ma'am, please cooperate, the officer said gently. We can discuss this further at the terminal. I will not, she shouted. You people are making a huge mistake. The cabin fell silent again. Every head turned. Even the hum of the engines seemed to fade beneath her voice. The officers waited patiently as she argued for another minute. But eventually, when it became clear they weren't backing down, Karen slumped in defeat. One of the officers gestured politely toward the aisle. With trembling hands and a red face, she grabbed her bag and stomped toward the front of the plane. The murmurs followed her like a trail of whispers. Someone clapped softly near the back. Then another joined in. Within seconds, scattered applause filled the cabinet loud, not mocking, but undeniably triumphant. Karen froze for half a second, eyes darting around, then stormed down the aisle, head held high, pretending not to hear it. As she disappeared through the cabin door, sunlight poured through the open hatch, illuminating the spot where she had sat all flight empty at last. The flight attendant passed by my seat, smiling faintly. Sir, thank you for your patience. We appreciate how calmly you handled that. I nodded, finally exhaling. No problem. I just wanted a quiet flight. She chuckled softly. You earned one. As I stepped off the plane, the California sun hit my face warm, bright, and free of drama. I adjusted my pink neck pillow and couldn't help but smile. After all that chaos, it wasn't just a flight that had landed. It was justice. The plane descended slowly through layers of bright white clouds, the morning sun painting streaks of gold across the cabin. Passengers straightened their seats and fastened their belts as the captain's voice echoed gently through the speakers, announcing the final approach. For most, it was a calm and ordinary landing. But for me and for Karen it marked the end of a bizarre, exhausting flight that none of us would ever forget. The sunlight gleamed off the wings, flickering through the windows, and I could feel every eye in the cabin watching her. The air felt thick with anticipation. Like everyone knew something big was about to happen. Karen sat across the aisle, arms crossed tightly over her chest, her sunglasses perched crookedly on her head, and her mouth twisted into an expression of pure fury. She had quieted down after being warned twice by the flight attendants, but every so often she muttered under her breath, shaking her head and glaring at me as if I had personally plotted to ruin her life. I kept my gaze fixed on the window, pretending not to notice, my pink neck pillow resting comfortably around my neck like a victory crown. The flight attendants exchanged uneasy glances as they performed their final checks. I overheard one whisper softly to another near the front, "Security will meet us at the gate. Just keep her calm until we land." The other nodded, her expression weary. It was clear they had dealt with difficult passengers before, but this one had tested their patience to the limit. When the wheels touched the runway with a gentle bump, a collective sigh filled the cabin. The engines roared, the plane slowed, and sunlight poured through the windows, illuminating faces relieved to finally reach the ground. But that relief was short-lived. Karen suddenly stood up before the seatbelt sign turned off, her voice slicing through the cabin. "Excuse me, I want to file a complaint right now." She waved her hand toward the flight attendants, ignoring their pleas for her to sit down. The entire plane went silent again. A few passengers exchanged knowing looks. Some discreetly pulled out their phones ready to record the final act of the drama that had unfolded mid-air. "Ma'am," the lead flight attendant said calmly, her tone steady but tired, "please remain seated until we've reached the gate. You'll have your chance to speak with the airline staff once we land." Karen scoffed loudly. "Oh, I'll definitely be speaking to someone. This man," she pointed directly at me, "assaulted me and refused to give up his seat in his property when I clearly needed it. You people let him humiliate me in front of everyone." The murmurs around us grew louder. A man 2 rows back called out, "Lady, no one touched you." Someone else chuckled, "You tried to steal his pillow." The laughter rippled through the cabin, and I could see Karen's cheeks burning crimson. I remained quiet, my pulse steady. I didn't need to defend myself anymore. Her outburst was doing that for me. The flight attendant took a deep breath and spoke again, firmer this time. "Ma'am, please sit down. You are disturbing other passengers." Karen finally dropped into his seat, fuming. Her arms were rigid, and she kept muttering about lawsuits and unprofessional staff. I looked out the window as the plane taxied toward the terminal, feeling the odd mix of satisfaction and exhaustion that comes when you've won an argument you never wanted to have in the first place. As we came to a stop, the seatbelt sign dinged off, and passengers began gathering their belongings. The attendants stood by the doors, ready to guide everyone off. But before anyone could leave, 2 airport security officers boarded the plane. The cabin fell into silence again. "Good morning," one officer said professionally. "We need to speak with a passenger, Karen Thomas." Heads turned toward her. She froze, eyes wide, mouth opening slightly. What? Why me?" she stammered. The lead attendant stepped forward. "Ms. Thomas, due to your behavior during the flight and repeated verbal harassment of passengers and crew, the airline has decided to file an incident report. You'll need to come with security." Gasps rippled through the cabin. Karen jumped to her feet, trembling with anger. "This is ridiculous. He's the one who started it. He refused to give me his pillow." That's discrimination. The officer sighed softly. Ma'am, please come with us. I'm not going anywhere, she shrieked, stomping her foot like a child. I paid for this flight. I have rights. The officer maintained a calm tone. You do, ma'am, and you can explain everything to the airline representative at the terminal. But for now, you need to come with us voluntarily. Everyone watched silently as she gathered her things with jerky, furious movements. She snatched her bag from the overhead bin, nearly hitting the person next to her, and stormed down the aisle. As she passed me, she glared, eyes filled with spite. You'll regret this, she hissed. I didn't reply. I simply leaned back, the sunlight warm on my face, the faint hum of passengers whispering around me. Karen stomped off the plane with security close behind her. Once she was gone, the tension lifted instantly. People began talking and laughing again, shaking their heads in disbelief. One man chuckled. That was better than an in-flight movie. Another patted my shoulder. You handled that like a champ, buddy. The lead flight attendant came over and smiled kindly. Thank you for your patience, sir. That was quite the situation. I nodded, offering a small smile. You all did great. I hope this kind of thing doesn't happen often. She chuckled softly. Not this extreme, thankfully. The airline will handle her. And don't worry, you'll be contacted for a short statement. But she's officially banned from our flights for harassment. The word banned echoed pleasantly in my mind. Justice, quiet and satisfying, had been served at 30,000 feet as I stepped out into the bright airport terminal. The sunlight streaming through the huge glass windows felt like a reward. I walked slowly, pillow still around my neck, watching through the glass as Karen stood outside with security officers, still gesturing wildly, her voice rising and falling in protest. But now, she was just another angry travelant, the queen of entitlement she believed herself to be. I smiled one last time, turned away, and walked toward baggage claim. The hum of conversation and rolling suitcases filled the air. The ordeal was finally over. Some people travel to find peace, others travel to escape, and then there are people like Karen who bring their chaos wherever they go. But sometimes fate, or in this case, airline policy, steps in to remind them that the world doesn't revolve around their demands. And me, I just wanted a quiet flight. I got drama, justice, and a story that would live forever in the memory of everyone on that plane.